Zdravo I dobro doјде na site, which means hello and welcome in Macedonian, my background. We are so pleased you can join us today for a celebratory launch of ALIA Multicultural. I am Mare Matichevsky, one of the founders and co-conveners of ALIA Multicultural. ALIA Multicultural acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to lands, waters, cultures and communities. We pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, to elders past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge this land was never ceded and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today I am coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Woiwurrung language group of the Eastern Kulin Nations of Wurundjeri country. Please take a moment to share the country where you are and post it in chat while I go through the outline of today's launch and share some important housekeeping. In this celebration, you will hear a number of speakers, including Oriana Acevedo, our co-convener, Vicky Edmonds, the ALIA president, and Kathy Warburton, the ALIA CEO. Our key speaker is Professor Jospeh Bianco with a presentation aptly titled Getting Real about Multilingualism. You are invited to contribute to the conversation by posting questions throughout, and after the key presentation, Sandra Jamal, the ALIA Multicultural website and social media coordinator, will lead the Q&A. Jackie Lucas from ALIA will be moderating throughout and posting key links in chat, so keep an eye out for that. And Rita Hardy, the ALIA Multicultural Secretary, will finish the session with a history of multicultural library services in Australia and share a key consultation questionnaire, inviting you all to contribute ideas on what ALIA Multicultural can champion going forward. This questionnaire also provides an opportunity for you to become involved in ALIA Multicultural or to subscribe to the news. Okay, so we encourage you to participate in the ongoing conversation and post key questions you would like addressed to our Slido for the Q&A session. For people who prefer to do this via phone, you can scan the QR code there and that will bring up where you can post the questions. In chat, we'll post a link to the Slido. And if you find a question posted there that is one that you really want to be addressed, you can upvote it by liking it. Remember, you can actually also follow us on socials because we've set some up. On Twitter, we are multiculturalia. And you can also follow us on Facebook. And if you want to contribute to the conversation on social media, please use ALIA Multicultural as the hashtag. So make sure you have your plate of meze with you, dolmades, whatever you want to eat, and have a drink to keep the festive mood going throughout. I will now hand over to Oriana. Thank you, vi blagodaram. And if you want, you can also post in chat a hello in your language.
Hola, that's an easy one. Hello, everyone. That was all Spanish. My name is Oriana Acevedo. I'm in Sydney, in the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge the custodian of this land on which the library, the State Library of New South Wales, was built. I acknowledge the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, and the elders past and present. And across Australia, welcome everyone again to the most exciting event of the year. Thank you for coming to the table. And thank you for joining at the beginning of this conversation and hopefully to an action-driven 2023. That's where our deepest hope are. And to begin in this exciting meeting today, I would like to welcome Vicky Edmonds, the ALIA president. Vicky has selected diversity as a presidential theme to support resilient, diverse workforce, attractive and developing talented, committed individuals from different cultural backgrounds who will have the strength and agility to navigate a rapidly changed workplace. This commitment is reflected in the priority ALIA strategic plan. And we are here to work, to support, to encourage cooperation and contribute to the success of ALIA strategic plan. So thank you, Vicky, and welcome. And now I'll leave you with ALIA president.
Thank you so much, Oriana. Welcome. I too would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal lands upon which we are all meeting. I am on the Darug and Gundungurra lands, and I'd like to pay my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and show my respect and acknowledge the capacity and resilience of elders past and present and any who are with us as part of this meeting today. I am very excited to be part of the launch of this new ALIA group, ALIA Multicultural. This new group is one that I am excited about launching as it ties in with my presidential theme of diversity and the richness that local multicultural communities bring to all our libraries. I want to thank each of you here today for your interest in this group, and I look forward to the discussions, the learnings, and the actions that I know will be part of this very culturally rich and diverse group. That's all I wanted to say, because I'm now going to hand you over to the ALIA CEO, Kathy Warburton.
I'm really thrilled to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And wanted to sort of say, yes, this is such an important milestone, and I understand that it's actually re-establishing the ALIA Multicultural Group. I'm not sure how long ago that was, when it was, but renewal is fantastic, and there's the number of people who are on this Zoom call, I think says a lot. And looking at everyone's names and the rich diversity you just see there without even talking to anybody is wonderful. But I wanted to congratulate the core committee of people who have, you know, spent a lot of work and planning and effort to get this group going again, and to really build a strong foundation for it to, you know, to have, you know, make a big splash into the future. I know that a lot of professional development plans are in place for 2023 and beyond. And I think it was already, Mare mentioned the survey, which will be going out. So please fill that out and share it with other people so they can really get a good sense of what it is the community wants from this group. Also, I think this group, professional development is one thing, and networking just amongst yourselves is another. But advocacy, which can happen in all sorts of actions, is also a really important part of special interest groups. And when I say advocacy, I suppose there's ways of doing activities which, you know, and fantastic ideas that you come up with about things that you can do, which might be, you know, working to do projects to do with workforce diversity, supporting international students, multilingual resources, all those sorts of things. All I would say is that if there's something where there's actually a voice that needs to be had on behalf of ALIA, always get in touch, you know, with ALIA, with Jackie in the first instance, so that we can sort of support that and give it that national voice, rather than it just going from this group in terms of any sort of comments to media or anything like that. That's just a tip I'd like to say. But in terms of actual activities and projects that you're doing, you know, the world is your oyster, so to speak. So I'm really excited about what's ahead and what you might be able to do. Also want to acknowledge the work of ALIA's Brock Johnston, who's done the website. And there's a link I know that Jackie's already put there. So that'll be a fantastic website, and it'll just grow with all the activities you have. So look, congratulations and best wishes for this group. I'll definitely, you know, when I can, jump into the meeting, see what's going on. And I'll pass back to the wonderful co-conveners, Mare and Oriana.
Thank you so much for your word. And yes, we will follow the leadership of ALIA, and we will implement whatever is necessary and work hard to deliver things. Not so much talking, not too many papers. Okay. Now I have the greatest pleasure and honor to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Jospeh Bianco. Now, many of you might work or have worked in the area of multicultural services. Every time that you touch a document, every time that you think of an idea on how to be inclusive, how to respect language, how to bring the values of sharing, you will be looking at ideas that Professor Bianco presented in 1987, the year when I arrived in Australia, because Professor Bianco is the author of the National Policy on Language in Australia. And it was a multilingual, comprehensive, right-based language policy. So every time that we talk about language interpretation and respect for culture, we're talking about Jospeh Bianco, who is also Professor Emeritus in Language and Literacy Education at the Graduate School of Education, University of Melbourne. He's also the author of more than 150 publications of language. I think if I write one piece of paper, we will be lucky. So let's listen to Professor Jospeh Bianco.
That was such a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, Oriana. I want to thank Oriana for the invitation, but also Mare, Vicky, Kathy, everyone else associated with this extremely important initiative. But before I start, I want to say that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to their ancestors past and their leaders present and future. I also want to say that when I think of heaven, I think of a library. So I feel like, and one of the things that I most love distributing on social media are pictures of libraries, including very modest ones, very grand ones, old ones, and modern ones. And if we think about what a library ultimately represents, or we might say a library, an information center or hub, what it ultimately represents, and you're the last people I need to explain this to, of course, it represents the accumulation of culture in the big C sense, the things we value and that have been stored for sharing, and what could be more important than that. So speaking to your launch today gives me great pleasure from that point of view, but also because of what someone said, that you're re-establishing an activity or a hub that ALIA Multicultural, that in some form or other has existed for a long time. And I paid a lot of tribute to Oriana for her amazing, enduring work in this. So I want to congratulate you on that. I really think that there's a lot of restoration going on, because we have to say to younger people who think that we're doing a lot of new things, that actually in Australia, we're recuperating, or we're recovering, or we're retrieving things that once made us the leaders in the world. And I'm not using hyperbole in saying that. It is literally true. For many years, Australia was the leader in interpreting and translating, in public policy on languages, in schools, in many areas. And for reasons that I won't go into today, we disestablished many of these things. Now, unfortunately, for some reason that I can't understand, I can't share my screen and display my PowerPoint. So I'm going to prepare this as a PDF and send it to the organizers who can share it with everybody, but I'm going to read it now and describe the images. Unfortunately, it's full of a lot of images, so you're going to depend on my ability to describe, and I hope that it's up to the task. So the first point I want to make in my main abstract is really the title, which is Getting Real About Multilingualism. And I mean that bluntly for a very important reason. Some decades after relatively positive attitudes and policies towards multilingualism, many institutions in Australia, but government as well, have become complacent. We see this in schools, in libraries, in health and legal settings. And sometimes when you talk to these organizations, they say, oh, well, look, it's less important than it used to be. After all, we have technologies now. I can go onto Google Translate or similar things, and I can get a good sense of what a text means. Or they might say, well, you know, maybe it's unfortunate from some points of view, but English is really the global language. It's the lingua franca of today, and it's less important to focus on languages than it used to be once. These are the two main, what I call exonerators that people use. They exonerate their organization from doing any serious work on language access for people, whether it's low literate people or multilingual policy, by saying that either we're going to use technology or it's not as important as it used to be. Now, this induces a sense of complacency. I think it's immense, and I think it's extremely unfortunate and actually dangerous. During the worst part of COVID in Australia, there's very substantial research from Macquarie University that shows this without any shadow of a doubt. The addressing of the problem by public health authorities was made much worse because they didn't have the access to all the interpreting that they needed, and they didn't have it in the right kind of way, and they didn't have it quickly enough. That's just one example. Unfortunately, it cost many people very dearly to have that. And when we go and look at where it was most dangerous in the United States, we see that the same regressive pattern that we saw in Australia, that is multilingual, newly immigrant communities were the worst affected. But it isn't even just that kind of justification. We can go through any number of justifications, whether they're economic or cultural or health, or just the general enrichment of society, the financial or employment opportunities of people. I could fill the entire street I live in with books and research papers. I edit a major book series for Springer International, and we publish many books every year that document this kind of thing all around the world. And I'm going to introduce some of these concepts as I go through the talk, but as I say, I'm going to have to describe the images. And I'm going to introduce two concepts to you. One of them is linguistic human rights, which is now at the highest level of attention in the United Nations system that it has ever been in history. And I think will, in the next couple of years, achieve the success that all of us are hoping for who are involved with promoting this, which is the idea of having linguistic human rights specifically mentioned within human rights law. That already exists in many countries and in the European Union and a few other places, but it's going to be adopted much more widely. And within all of these statements, there's advocacy and agitation. There's always attention on public libraries. There's always attention on agencies or bodies or hubs that can distribute and circulate and gather information, and that can provide multilingualism in texts and in many other forms, and provide support to people. So it's time Australia got real again. We were very real once, but then we lost our way. Now, on the slide now, I have a picture of two book covers. One of them is called Empires of the Word by Nicholas Ostler, and the other one is The Last Lingua Franca by Nicholas Ostler. These are both books that I like very much, and I like Nicholas's writing. And in Empires of the Word, he traces the history of lingua franca in history, all over different parts of the world. So he looks at, Asian and European and African and other settings in the world, and tracks how imperial growth has always been accompanied by linguistic expansion and imposition of dominant languages on other people. And of course, this culminates with today's English, which is by far the most widespread language in human history and touches more languages than any other and influences languages everywhere, etc. So we know this. You go to any airport anywhere on earth, and the language, in addition to the local national official language, will be English. The next book, and Nicholas wrote that in 2010, I think it was, and I actually was... I spoke to him a couple of times about this as it was developing. He's in the UK. His next book, or the next book that I'm going to talk about, is The Last Lingua Franca. And the subtitle is English Until the Return of Babel. It's a very interesting concept. And he basically is arguing something I've always believed and argue, and many people hold. It's not a rare view to hold. And that is that there won't be another language that replaces English. People think that there might be Chinese or something. But instead, what's really happened in the world of communication sociology and the pattern of communication in the world is the possibility of multilingualism and effective communication. When people oppose multilingualism, one of the things that they often say is, oh, it's inefficient, or how can countries cope with many languages? Well, we know that some of the oldest existing countries in the world have always been extremely multilingual. India has at least 1,000 languages and 23 scheduled languages and so on. So there's the idea that monolingualism is some kind of guarantee of efficiency is really quite absurd and ahistorical. But in this second book, what Nicholas argues, and what I believe and what I'm going to mention now, is that instead of English being supplanted, what will really happen is that, and this is well advanced, is that there will be developed multiple kinds of Englishes, because languages reflect culture and different communities inject into English the cultures that they speak. So English changes, and that's, there are 4 academic journals that focus on world Englishes at the moment. So there are enormous differences all around the world. So English carries multiple languages. It's a multicultural language within its own being. And libraries should think about this, because libraries in Australia anyway, this is an area where I think there's been very little progress. It's really just standard Australian English or British or American English that people focus on. We have to think more widely, especially with spoken texts. And in another thing that's happening, of course, is the technology mediation. Now, this doesn't contradict the point I was making a minute ago, as I'm going to argue later, in that just because it's possible to get a sense of what a text means by putting it into an app, and these are astonishing, I pay credit to them, I don't criticize them, I think they're useful and helpful, and I encourage people to use them. It means that they access texts that are not in their main language. But A, it only gives you a general idea of what's there. C, they make a lot of mistakes. I mean, they will improve over time. And D, I think my counting there has gone a bit off. All cultural nuance is lost. So there's a lot of reasons why technologies are just an aid to multilingual communication rather than an argument against it. And I can go through some of those more in questions if you wish. So my next slide is about communication today. And what I'm basically arguing on the slide, as you will see, is that what's happening in the world of communication has exposed a lot of limits to how schooling, libraries, and government information work. We make assumptions about languages and communication which don't really reflect what actually is happening. And I'm going to mention a couple of things about this in just a moment. It's not just that our institutions or our practices can't accommodate multilingualism. Many can, of course, but we tend to think in terms of languages as bounded entities, like there are foreign languages and they're rigidly divided. Just think of the Romance group, you've got French, you've got Occitan, you have Catalan, you've got Castilian, you have Italian, you have Romanian, etc. But in fact, when you go and look at how people communicate, you find that it's much more dynamic than bounded silos of communication. So what we see in actual communication is what we call multimodality. People communicate across multiple modes using technology within spoken forms of communication or signed forms of communication. They range across the languages they know in a process called translanguaging, which is now very much researched. And we see that when you talk to a multilingual person in English, they're actually processing what you're saying in the strongest language that they have. So they're understanding, if you're talking to a Spanish-speaking person whose education has mostly been in Spanish, and you're talking to them in English in a class about something or other, they are processing the English information with Spanish. So we use all the languages, and this happens if you have 5 languages. You might not use all of them all the time, but what's happening is that we are always multilingual if we are multilingual, even when we're using one language. I hope that message gets across. I've got a little image that expresses that better. So the boundaries between languages are really just things that exist in books and in ideologies. In reality, we are communicating multilingually a lot of the time. And translanguaging, mixed communication, and multilingualism in practice is how this works. Now, with a colleague a couple of years ago, I published a book called The Dominant Language Constellation. Her name is Larissa Aronin. in Israel. And Larissa and I have some other contributors in this volume, and it's originally Larissa's term, and it shows that most societies, most institutions, and many individuals have a cluster of languages, what we call a constellation, that they work with. And these we depict them as a constellation in the stars. So you might find that interesting. Then I have a slide which actually was going to ask you to think of the various texts that you have read, viewed, listened to in the last 24 hours. And this comes up with, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, lots of other things here, pen and paper, regular book, a GPS system. And it's building up a point about multiple literacies, which comes in the slide after that. And this slide basically tells me, now what's going on here? Sorry. This slide tells me that we are involved in what my colleague at the University of Melbourne, Professor Leslie Farrell, has called Literacy 4.0. And this is linking industrial revolutions in the manufacture to revolutions in communication. Now, in manufacture, people normally talk about the first industrial revolution, which was mechanization with water power and steam. The second industrial revolution with mass production and assembly lines, like the famous Ford assembly lines in the United States. The third industrial revolution, which is normally considered to be computers and computer-aided technologies. And now we're going well beyond that into the fourth, which is the combination of artificial intelligence and what are called cyber physical systems. And what this means is that it's possible to remotely make things happen through artificial intelligence. Now, this is going to happen to me shortly, but it's possible to undergo surgery through software which is coded in a computer, software coding in Chicago, say, and then through the cyber physical system to have this delivered in a hospital in Melbourne. So what this is telling us is something really interesting about here and now, and then and there. I'm going to talk about something briefly about London in a minute, but a few years ago, there was a concept developed by a Cambridge University scholar of superdiversity. And what he was meaning was that you could have somebody, this happened to him, and it was on the basis of this that he got the idea. A man walking along a street in London, and he's got headphones on, and he's actually talking to his family in Lagos, Nigeria. And so this displacement of here and there, in his consciousness, he's actually in Nigeria in that moment, even though he's physically on a street in London. Now, of course, many of you do this too. I do it myself with my family, which is spread around the world, friends, conferences, etc. So all of these things bring language as multilingualism, as what I call the literacy of the 21st century, to the fore. We have to be more ambitious in our understanding of this, because the justification for multilingualism is already very strong through the fourth industrial revolution, and especially literacy 4.0, understanding the deep way in which all technologies are linked in with multiple languages. Then we will understand the kind of multilingualism that is emerging. It's different from traditional multilingualism, but it's an extension of it. So the next slide, I talk about different kinds of bilingualism, but the heading could be multilingualism. And we can locate this now as a conversation back into Australia and ask ourselves, of all the language abilities in the community, and let's just imagine 5-year-old children with these language abilities, it's obviously very hard to classify the kinds of multilingualism that are there. One of the things that we know, and these are two terms that I use that can be helpful to understand this, is that some people are involved in additive multilingualism. They speak a language that is not endangered, and they are learning an additional language. So they're adding, say, their Japanese to their English, or they're adding Portuguese to their 3 existing languages or whatever. This is additive. And this comes when your mother tongue is strengthened and boldened. You're not losing your first language as you acquire another one. Unfortunately, even today, despite decades of struggling against this, we find that for migrant and Indigenous children, it's not like that. It's subtractive multilingualism. They are multilingual or bilingual for a short period of time, but the system is actually pushing their mother tongue out of them. And just think of what an injustice and what a terrible loss this is. Is there any other ability in which institutions of the society try to take away from people something that they can do very well? This is very, very odd that it's possible to send children with an amazing precocious ability in a language, and this is taken away from them, something that many adults spend their whole lifetimes trying to achieve. And yet we have thousands and thousands of potentially bi and multilingual children who are pushed into English-only programs. Nevertheless, our society is incredibly multilingual and will remain so. The next slide I've got on is of Princess Charlotte, who may one day be the Queen of Australia. And it's from the photograph I've got is of articles that were published in UK press a couple of years ago when she was going to kindergarten, and may still be doing this, although I think she's in school by now, and was learning Spanish in an immersion bilingual program. And there was this great celebration of it, saying she's already bilingual at age 2. This is adorable and smart. Well, it is adorable and it is smart, but it's not so rare. Literally millions and millions and millions of children who are not praised for their bilingualism and multilingualism are just as multilingual. And I'm delighted that Princess Charlotte is becoming a full bilingual. Now, I won't put this on the slides that I send you because I'm trying to contact the owner to get the copyright permission, but I have a little video I was going to show to contrast this to Princess Charlotte, and it's of a street boy in India who automatically, because he's selling stuff to tourists on the street, knows he speaks in French, Italian, Japanese, what he calls Hirani, which is I think is Persian, Arabic, Japanese, etc. And he goes through these languages, and he just knows the routine of saying, look, this fan, it's a beautiful fan, it's a very hot day, only 40 rupee or whatever he's asking for it or whatever. And this is just a way of contrasting both privileged bilingualism and folk or ordinary or street bilingualism, but also to say that we really have to value the multiple, and libraries have a huge role to play in this, with outreach to communities to understand how they know and how they learn and how they speak and communicate. And it's much more than named languages. And what I mean by named language is a language that is an established language within our repertoire of languages, so all the languages of Europe are named languages, the main languages of Asia are named languages, but there's literally multiple forms of communication that are not named, that mix multiple languages, which is the main form of communication of other people. And libraries and information systems will be pushed to invest much more in understanding the technologies that will allow expressive ability in these. Now, studies have been done on people who are not very formally literate in the standard prose of English, but that produce TikTok videos in an instant. So, the kinds of literacies for doing things are very diverse. So, our schools are focusing only on one, but it's not the kind of literacy that most young people use and are motivated by. I'll skip this, but I was going to talk a little bit about language as a resource and what I mean by that. But I will talk about the next 4 slides with a little bit of detail, and that is to say, there is a strong movement around the world, and I signaled this at the beginning, really everywhere in the world, and Australia is quite active in this, but not at government level, for language rights, for linguistic human rights. And in 2020, I'm with the Australian Academy of the Humanities, and we hooked up with academies in English-speaking countries to say that English-speaking countries should be in the forefront of promoting multilingualism, because we're at this extraordinary moment in human history where communication itself is being transformed really radically, and it's happening around us and we're adapting to it, but we don't often lift our eyes back from it and say, my goodness, that wasn't possible 5 years ago, and already it's possible. And what this means, I remember when the World Wide Web first came in, and a lot of people I work with in language revival and language rights were saying, oh, this will be the death of minority languages. They won't be able to survive the big languages on the internet. But in fact, the internet is a very good friend of small languages. The World Wide Web, there's hundreds and hundreds of support groups, language revitalization groups, well, not hundreds, thousands all around the world that allow people who speak very small languages or languages spoken by groups dispersed across the world, like the gentleman I said in Nigeria, who can link with other people. There's one particular study, for example, of people in Melbourne and Tigrayan speakers in Eritrea and Ethiopia and Barcelona and Buenos Aires. And so linking people across vast distances in instantaneous communication in languages that can't get written material produced very much, although there is quite a lot of stuff for Tigrinya, of course. So this is an interesting development, and we have to really take it more seriously. So this statement we put out was an international call for action for governments to do more, and it's having an effect in the UK. The next slide, and I wish you could see this, but it's all these dots arranged in an interesting image, and I've asked you to think about what they represent, and some of you would have worked it out. The slide after that puts all those dots against the Thames River, and you can tell instantly that it's London. But what you can't tell is that those dots represent concentrations of language. And what this is a really remarkable piece of research across the entire urban landscape of London, and this is happening in other big cities around the world, plotting where there are concentrations of more than 10 speakers of any language. So if you are on any subway train, any tube train in London, you can find out where Bengali is spoken at the next stop, or where Portuguese is spoken, or where Arabic is spoken, or even much smaller languages. There are 300 languages mapped onto the tube in London. These are second languages mapped by tube stop, all done by Oliver O'Brien from the University College London. So you can work out where to speak Burmese or Italian, or where to get anything that you wish in language. So you can see the technology fosters and facilitates multilingualism in a really important way. Meanwhile, while you've got these 300 languages in London alone, and you have this mapping of technology, and not just on the tube, but in multiple other ways, you then have the schools where really only a small number, it's actually only 3 are the main languages taught. So the largest number of community languages in Europe can be found in London, in the United Kingdom, more than 300, as I said. And some of the most established, Bengali, Gujarati, Punjabi, Cantonese, Mandarin, Hokkien, are languages which are not taught in the schools at all. And yet at the same time, you constantly have, and in the UK it happens much more frequently than here, and it's made much worse after Brexit, studies lamenting the shortage of what we'll call, in inverted commas, foreign language skills in the UK, and estimates of what it costs the UK economy in the tens of billions of dollars every year in lost trade. As a nation of official monoglots is a nation of polyglots. So you have this contradiction between the way things function officially and what really is the case. Now in Australia, the late Professor Michael Klein called this thing the monolingual mindset, that we are a multilingual society, very, very much multilingual, but we operate as a society as though we were monolingual. And when we look at what we do in our schools, it's not surprising. Now, I'm not going to make any state-based comparisons, but I will just say that there is a lot of difference across the states, and Victoria does relatively well. but in some states it's surprisingly poor. But the overall average in Australia is extremely low compared to all the countries of the OECD. The low investment, we're in the lowest band of the 35 comparable countries studied by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. So we broadly align with that low level in terms of curriculum time in primary school. We're well behind most OECD countries at the junior secondary level. The only countries that were worse off than us in that year of the study were England and Greece. And in Greece, it's improved significantly since then. We also don't give anywhere near enough time to language programs. And this is another thing that libraries can do to support students, teachers, and schools with any number of things, because schools maybe are not all schools can be as experimental and switched on with modern communication systems as libraries can be. So not enough time. In primary school, the total percentage time devoted to first languages ranges from 6% in Denmark, South Korea, 10% in Poland and Spain, with an average of only 4%. So in effect, in Australia, as Cruikshank and Wright wrote when they analysed these data, young people in Australia spend less time studying languages than young people in every other OECD country. And that's extraordinary when you consider that so many of the problems that we have, you just listen to the nightly news, our problems are with other countries. We have relationship problems with other countries, trade issues and disputes, security questions. And if we move away from the bad news just to good news, we can see the family connections. I'm going to finish on that in a few minutes, etc. So it's very obvious that we have to do much, much better, and we have to push governments to do better. And as a result of these studies, the UK has tried again, and they have now set a target of 75% of the equivalent of year 10 in our system of students by this year, 2022. I don't know if they're going to achieve it this year, and 90% of all students by 2025 taking languages as a requirement of the English baccalaureate based on the French baccalaureate that they have introduced. So in the United States too, well, the US does significantly better than the UK, but the American Academy of Arts and Sciences just recently said proficiency in English is essential in many facets of life in the 21st century, at home and abroad. But English alone is insufficient to meet our nation's needs in a global society. In fact, it's getting less and less sufficient over time. American industry participates in more foreign markets than ever before, and the nation is engaged diplomatic or militarily in every corner of the world, but we're not prepared for what we do linguistically. Challenges in scientific research and technological innovation come from all around the world, and we are being left behind more and more. My next slide is about what this year is in terms of Indigenous languages. It's not just the beginning of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. It's also the first time that the UN has adopted an international decade devoted to a problem in society. They've done this sometimes, but they've never done it following on from an international year devoted to that. And that was in 2019 on the International Year of Languages. Now it's a decade. And when we look at the estimates of endangerment of languages, I'm talking here of small Indigenous languages, we see that up to 70% of the Indigenous languages of the world, which are the majority of languages in the world, are spoken by very small groups of people. Now, recently they did an assessment of all the languages that they could study, and they concluded that 70% of languages are struggling for vitality across generations. This is a really serious problem. The number of languages that will be lost, and many of them are being revived as well, it shows us that we've got a huge effort of human beings in the preservation and conservation of the languages that people identify with. This happens all across Australia, of course, because of the oppression historically of Indigenous languages by the settler colonial state. But what we have now all across Australia is an effort to reverse this. And it's something that libraries can and should become involved with to support communities, but also to support the wider community to understand that our fellow communities are struggling with this effort. We can support, or at least know of what they're doing. And the location of language loss in the world is this. I'll quote the last study that was done on this. At one extreme, more than 70% of languages are extinct or moribund in Australia, Canada, and the United States. But at the other extreme, less than 10% in sub-Saharan Africa. Overall, we find that 19% of the world's living languages are no longer being learned by children. So the multilingualism story in the world and in Australia is extremely complex. You've got more and more multilingualism, but we've also got schools that do less and less on behalf of multilingualism. And then we've got some categories of multilingualism, especially indigenous languages, that are struggling for against pressure for their children to abandon the languages and adopt English only. And no one who's involved in language reclamation is against English. They're all pushing for bilingualism and multilingualism. And that's the virtue of languages compared to almost any other identity marker of human beings. We can have multiple languages in our lives, and whereas we can't do that with most of the other kinds of identity systems. They're exclusive of one another. So in all of this, my basic argument is that bilingualism or multilingualism is the literacy of the 21st century, the multiliteracy of the 21st century. And we need to reflect on this and think of what to do. Your creating of ALIA Multicultural couldn't come at a better time. It's the most ideal time to be positioned to support work in this area, the intangible heritage of humanity, as the United Nations system calls it. Now, I'm just going to finish in a couple of moments, and I just wanted to mention that a few years ago, I had the good fortune to be invited to Salzburg in Austria, which, as many of you would know, is the city of Mozart. And we had a multilingual international conference to issue a statement on behalf of multilingualism for the UN and other bodies. And we called it the Salzburg Statement for a Multilingual World. It's just on 2 sheets. You can get it in more than 80 languages, easily available on the web. And I just want to read some of the statements that we made, that all 193 UN member states and most people in the world are multilingual. 7,097 languages are currently spoken across the world. 2,464 of these are endangered. 23 languages dominate. They're spoken by over half of the world's population. 40% of people have no access to education in a language they understand. 617 million people, children and adolescents, do not achieve minimal proficiency levels in reading because they're taught in an official language that they do not speak at home. 244 million people are international migrants, of whom 20 million are refugees, a 41% increase since 2000 alone. Migrants and refugees alone would constitute the 5th most populous country in the world. And then we conclude, our world is truly multilingual and becoming more so, yet many education and economic systems, citizenship processes, public administration, disadvantage millions of people due to the way they use languages and ignore language abilities. We must tackle this challenge if we are to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals adopted by 193 countries to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. Languages and literacies are linked to those things, very serious things. It's not just about recreation. Of course, that's important. No one is against recreation and enjoyment, but we have to keep in mind that languages are serious things connected to the life opportunities of people. I've just got 2 more slides, which you can't see, of course, but this one here is called Leveraging Diaspora Advantage. A few years ago, the Academy of the Humanities and other academies did a study on what Australia would gain if we supported Chinese and Indian Australians to keep the languages that they speak at home, not just the standard forms, but all the languages that they speak at home. alive intergenerationally. And of course, this goes for all communities. It was just a study of those two. And what we concluded is that a diaspora is a claim to a country of family origin. Individuals who identify with this claim, individuals who develop emotional attachment to this claim and what it represents for them, people who are connected despite being dispersed in their way. I was saying before, walking down a London street, but in the conversation you're having, you're actually in Lagos, Nigeria, and who can activate the homeland and various host lands, and who are recognized by others for this claim. This advantage is for the entire country that hosts these people. It's a strategic placement of insiders and outsiders at a time when the world is changing so rapidly that here and there, now and then, are becoming mixed. And finally, and I regret that you can't see this one, it's taken from Max Rosa on Twitter, and it's basically a mapping of phone, Twitter, and other communication networks across the world. And what it shows is, you know, it's a stylized globe with color links, and it shows you the amazing interpenetration of links. So if you look at Ukraine, or no, we won't do Ukraine because of current events, but look at Ghana and Zimbabwe and South Africa and London and India and China, Italy and Greece and Chile, and you will find that the color codes, the mode of communication and the language in which it was done. And you see that this is a chart of the world which is different from the one we normally see. It's the world talking to itself, and it's talking to itself in an extremely pluralistic, multilingual, diverse, and multi-generational and multimodal way. So I think that we have to think of the world, therefore, not so much in terms of nation states, but interacting groups of people, that is populations. I see that my colleague Alice Chick is here, who did a wonderful book on multilingual Sydney. It's this kind of thing that I mean, making the locus of communication a locus of study around your library. Understand the languages that are spoken there, do a little survey of the communities there, support the activities of multilingual vitality in that area, support people to know about the efforts that people are making for language study and maintenance all around Australia, and these kinds of efforts. So the creation of ALIA Multicultural, is that correct? Have I got it right? It's not, or ALIA Multilingual, is an instrument that will allow you to reactivate this. Libraries should be in the forefront of this activity, and I think you will be. Thank you very much.
Now, what can I say? I just go, wow, it's always so fantastic, so inspirational. And we know, I'm pretty sure that everybody who's been listening to this, immediately we go, oh, plotting. I have identified some of the gap and we can do something about it. But now I'm going to leave my colleague Rita Hardy to continue the conversation. And how can I say, Professor Bianco, that it's been, I think delighted is not the right word. I will think of a word in Spanish. Fantástico. Yes, that's what it is. Fantástico.
Yeah. Before we go to Rita, we're going to answer some questions, and Sandra Jamal will be answering those. One of the things that your talk brought to mind to me is the importance of language with identity. And I guess growing up, I'm an example of one of the people who never felt that I understood my language well enough, and I feel like a great loss because of that. So yeah, I'm glad we've got this focus happening.
Yeah, that was honestly a very fascinating talk. Thank you so much, Joseph, for that. Hi, everybody. My name is Sandra Jamal. I'm a librarian at DY Library here on the beautiful Northern Beaches. I'm also the social media and website coordinator for the ALIA Multicultural group. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land which I'm working on, which is the Gadigal people. And let's jump straight into that Q&A. I could see there's a few questions on the Slido. Please feel free to continue to post some. We'll be answering some of them later on as well, and I think we'll be publishing them on the website. Is that right? Yeah, that's from what I understand, we'll be doing that. All right, let's take a look. So the first question is, are we going to be having a summary of the slide notes from Joseph?
Yes.
Yeah, I assume that'll be going out. Next, we've got one from Caroline Beatty. It says, is anyone interested in how we could support, for example, crowdfund fees or mentorship study for a professional GLAM qualification for somebody from a refugee background? That's really interesting, actually. Anybody?
Hey, Sandra. Jackie from ALIA. It's certainly something that the group can take into consideration. ALIA already has a scholarship for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but with the formation of this group, there's no reason why that's not something we could look into if there is interest. ALIA has a mentoring scheme as well, and we can, with the wide reach of ALIA and our connections, we could certainly look at mentoring as well. We received an email earlier this year from a person who'd come to Australia from Ukraine this year, and they were interested in mentoring. So it's already a conversation in the office, but now that we have ALIA Multicultural, we can have a focal point for these conversations. So a wonderful suggestion from Caroline, and something that ALIA Multicultural can take up into 2023.
I think that'll be a great focus. Next question we've got is from an anonymous person, and it says, will robots, i.e. not human robots, with artificial intelligence take over the library customer service with other languages in libraries? Oh, that's an interesting one. Anybody have any insight?
Is that asking me?
Oh, it's across the board.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question, Sandra? And maybe I just might like to address the question. It's about artificial intelligence replacing humans, I think.
With, I guess it's taking over the multilingual side of things.
Are we referring to things like Google Translate and the multilingual sort of self-serve that we have in libraries? That's what I'm wondering if that question is referring to. I don't think you can really replace language. We know that the translators don't work effectively, and there's that whole concept of lost in translation. I know whenever I try to translate something into Macedonian, I always have a great giggle at what it turns into, because it really does lose a lot of translation.
Yeah, most translation technologies have those faults, and they are getting better. And in any case, most technologies are best when they're accompanied by human agents, people who look after what these technologies do. It's quite likely that the areas, the areas of human service interaction that will be least affected by robotics will be things that involve communication.
Would anybody else like to add anything to that?
The points that are right on Facebook, when they get translated by the Instagram or Facebook translator, you literally lose the whole meaning of what you're trying to say, and it's not even funny. So I would never be in favor of, and especially with people with migrant background, when they come to a foreign nation like Australia, they're already intimidated even without having to utter a word, and then putting them in this situation would be really unfortunate for us.
Definitely. I mean, I have seen a lot of customers using technology in order to get their questions or requests across. When they come into the library, they'd bring up Google Translate on their phone and use the speaker function on it. So it does have a place, but I think there's still a long time before any chance of being replaced in robot form by them. Okay, let's move on. We have another anonymous question. How can we increase appreciation and importance for bilingual and multilingual experience in a country that preferences English as the main communication?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't worry about the fact. I mean, we need English is a common language, and it's the language of our official functioning. It doesn't have an official legal status, but it is the language of official domain in education. So I don't think there's anything to be gained by developing an anti-English thing. I think we can promote multilingualism on the basis of having a shared means of communication already. It's a language, so I don't think the only problem with English is the complacency that comes from the power of English in the world. And I've argued against that a lot. It's not about English, it's about the attitude of complacency that people adopt. Because someone in Thailand, you go to Thailand, you lose your passport, someone's going to be able to talk to you in English. That's a convenience for English speakers that speakers of many other languages don't have. But it's a completely different domain from multilingualism. So English might serve the function of our legal administration, though there we need languages other than English a lot as well, and governmental processes and administration. But the rest of our community can function multilingually completely well, and use English. So and also have English available. So I don't think that there's an issue about English within Australia, other than attitudes that go with it. If we get rid of attitudes that English is enough or better than some other language, or morally superior, or somehow, better in multiple ways. We have to get rid of those attitudes. It's a language of our culture. It's a language of literature. It's a language of all sorts of things, just like Punjabi is. And if we have an attitude of inclusion and acceptance, libraries can be in the forefront of celebrating the main languages, but all the languages, if they possibly can, in their areas that they serve. Individuals, they can work with schools and community language schools and after-hour schools to celebrate the language learning that children do in Albanian and Bulgarian and whatever else outside of the school system or in the school system. They can do, obviously their shelves should be full of areas where multilingual resources of different kinds are available. For a while, I was working with some students in Melbourne. We did an experimental technique with students in a Melbourne school, including in a Greek school, who were learning Chinese, and a school in China. And what we did for every week for quite a long time, we worked with the students to teach so that they taught the students in China English, and then they received lessons in Chinese from the others. And we were just trying to see how the kids perceive teaching and how they would teach compared to how teachers teach and all of these things, and also what they valued in learning. Well, the libraries were absolutely essential to that working. Find out what schools are doing, collaborate with them, work with them, and community organizations. I mean, you'll come up with a million other ideas because you're professionals in this area and I'm not, of how libraries and information systems work. But I think we should embrace the technologies because they support and help multilingualism. And the fears that people used to have at the beginning that it was going to be for English only, that's not justified anymore.
Jadwiga from, I think.
It's actually not a question, it just contribute to the discussion. I'm the Multicultural Services Librarian at Liverpool City Library. We're going to have a meeting, our group is meeting on Thursday, the last time for this year. I'm just listening to, especially the Professor Joseph Bianco. I'm responsible for purchasing material in other languages than English, of course. And if you're looking, and I just posted actually the link to SBS. They work together with Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they created that easy use resource, which is Census Explorer. You can actually go there, put your suburb title and you end up how many languages are spoken in your area. So in Liverpool, 171. Can you imagine and how you decided which languages are going to be represented on our shelves? So we've got 18 languages, but that's my personal, and probably I try to talk to my colleagues too. This is not English and other languages. It's just one community. And, you know, somebody can move, I can speak 3 languages or 4 languages, if I include Russian. So I can move between those collections and borrow books from here. So, you know, it's just not only to English, but I can read in other language that I'm interested in. So for me, all this is like a community collection. It's not, it's nothing different. No language is superior. And I know many parents, when they start living in Australia, they do prefer to children to learn English first, because they seems that was going to give them better start in life, which educators said, no, you have to be proficient, or you have to know your first language, mother tongue first, before you can be good in English. So I just understand how I understand. It's not superior, not superior language, just languages we feel comfortable. I like to use Google Translate. It's simply the way of communicating with the new customers coming in. They're coming from overseas, refugees, migrants. It's not perfect, of course. I heard so many stories how it translates, because it's not live language. Nobody will ever, artificial intelligence, I don't think so, that's my personal view, will ever be better than a human being, because language is a living language. And the way we speak, the intonation, how we feel on the day is completely different, just not straight. So I just like the idea that we're all English, yes. I think legislation said this is our common language in Australia. But if we have collection of books in other languages, they're on the same floor all together, because that's anybody can come in and use and borrow the material in those languages. Probably that's just my idea.
All right. Thanks for that insight. Yeah. Joseph, you wanted to continue?
Could I just say that I think that what ALIA Multilingual, is it ALIA Multilingual, ALIA Multicultural?
Multicultural.
Multicultural, sorry. I think what it gives you is an instrument for advocacy outside, because I know that librarians, I mean, I use libraries all the time. As I said, I love libraries. And I know, because people are working with text, there's a lot of innovation and thinking, a lot of good people in libraries who think about these things. But what's been missing in the last few years has been a public voice, I think, maybe I'm wrong, I think a public voice representing the world of librarian interests and collecting and all of the activities, outreach and stuff that are done out to the world and to government inquiries. What we have to stop is our governments from saying that they can manage. And when you look at school level education in languages, it's very, very, very bad in Australia. We have to do much better. So we're going to need your support as an active agent for change. You know, I don't want to name individual states or anything. Think about your state, think about the setting you're in, and think, is there a voice of the librarians promoting languages, not just in libraries, but all across the board, including in schools? So that's what I think is wonderful about the creation of this new body.
Mm-hmm. Do we have time for one more question, you think, Mary?
Maybe one more and then we'll go to Rita, but we will answer anything that can't be answered in the Slido today. We'll try and address via the website at a later point. So the questions won't be missed if they're not answered right now.
Final question for today will be, how can we encourage more people from the COLD community to join the profession?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I think that maybe, you know, I think a lot of people come to Australia, especially people with disadvantaged backgrounds who don't really have an experience of libraries and public library systems in their countries. I mean, Australia's very lucky with the I mean, I think we can do better, of course, and we have done better, but I know in a lot of countries that I work in, there are really not public libraries at all and community outreach from libraries. So we're very lucky in that way. And I think that it's a question of familiarization and for people to understand what's possible there and for libraries to break down the barriers. I mean, for lots of people who are not that comfortable with their own levels of literacy and writing, it can be very forbidding to walk into a place that's devoted to the written word to a large extent. So I think becoming aware of who is in the community is the single most important step. So some kind of survey knowledge of local languages, local communities, local problems, and then having outreach, participating with those groups to understand what other people are trying to do, what libraries can do distinctively. I mean, every organization should do what it does itself distinctively, you know, not try and reproduce anyone else's work. And libraries have a special distinctive role. And it's in many areas very present. You know, I just saw in the chat some wonderful information. What was it? It was about, I think, the ACT public system, the bilingual story times at libraries, ACT, for example, 16 languages, these kinds of things. I know that they happen in different places. Well, it's very important that what we do is use those as a mechanism to bring older people, parents of children and children, people who might not see themselves as library users. There's a big tradition of that. I mean, I know when my parents migrated, you know, that was the library, or what the library represented was like, you know, a house on the hill. It was not something they would have ever dreamt of being able to go nearby. They basically had very little schooling. And so I think we have to understand that disadvantaged migrants, for disadvantaged migrants, libraries don't represent necessarily an easy place to get into. And yet, look what's available in them, what is possible for them to do. I think that gap needs to be overcome.
Can I add to this? And I think there might be other people from the ALIA Multicultural group that might want to add to this too. Part of our advocacy is very much around uplifting even diversity-focused librarians who are already within the system and actually advocating for roles that are in a higher position as well. So we have some multiple factors that contribute to our profession needing to increase its diversity. There's also, I think, Caroline Beatty's question around, you know, can we have something that can enable people to study librarianship, so people from refugee backgrounds. There are a whole heap of things that we can look at on, you know, how to bring voices and representation into the sector, but we also do have a lot of diverse representation there that I kind of feel needs to be uplifted and allow those voices to have some gravitas and, you know, be able to state the important things around our identities as well. So, and I think ALIA Multicultural will definitely be in a position to kind of be moving with that advocacy and really trying to kind of uplift that further. And I know there are quite a few people in our group that kind of really are passionate about that too.
I think all the points that people are making through this conversation, if they are not addressed now, they will be addressed through action. They will be addressed to action responses, because the opportunity for studies and building up is happening. It's happening already. So there is a model. It's a model that might not be distributed across the entire country, but we will have that opportunity. Wollongong is one of the cities who is doing that. Currently, they actually describe as growing their own people by giving them opportunities and creating a path for education. Eventually, they will come in and they will come back to work in that local government area with a knowledge that belongs to them. You know, it's not your community, and then your investment is guaranteed. If you just walk into floating around and thinking, oh, I'll do this because I'm copying from somewhere else, you probably are mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
I think there's an issue that hasn't really been touched on yet, and that's that there may be financial barriers for people of migrant backgrounds getting into the profession. I mean, getting a library qualification at a university is quite expensive if you don't have HECS. If you're not a citizen, there is a huge barrier to getting that qualification. So that if we're looking into encouraging people from refugee backgrounds to study and to get into the field, that's something we'd need to be looking into. And I saw Anne earlier was saying that in the chat that there are people who do come into the library who are surprised that the libraries are free, because, and I've seen that a lot too, there are many that come from countries where libraries, just having a library card they have to pay for, and then borrowing books they have to pay for. It's just wrapping their mind around the concept of accessing the library for free is a big thing. And that might be a barrier that's also preventing them from coming into the library to begin with. So it's just about really getting the word out. And for myself, a part of the Middle Eastern community, or for Murray, a part of the Macedonian community, just getting that word out and helping people to understand what is available to them for free, it makes a big difference. I think we'll finish it off there. Is that right? All right, let's hand on over to Rita Hardy to continue the session. Rita?
Great, thanks very much, Sandra.
Thank you, everybody, by the way.
Thank you, that was some great questions, so thanks everyone. I'm Rita, everybody, and I'm a team leader and responsible for multicultural services at Mary Beck Libraries, which is formerly known as Moreland City Libraries in Victoria. And I'm also secretary of the new ALIA Multicultural Group. My feet are planted on the beautiful Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung land, and I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation, at which I live, work and enjoy. First and foremost, I would like to thank all of our speakers for their valuable contributions today, and particularly, of course, Jospeh, who I always find very inspirational, and his passion for multicultural always is so contagious. So thank you so much, Jospeh, for being our keynote speaker today. I have been in the area of multicultural services for a very extremely long time, probably over 25 years now, and my heart is always in the multicultural area. I would like to mention that Joseph's opening remark, where he mentions that after decades of relatively positive attitudes and policies towards multilingualism, some institutions in Australia becoming complacent. This really resonated with me because I do recall the multicultural library service in the early 2000s, where we did become very complacent. So if you reflect back to Victoria in the 1970s, the first national conference on multiculturalism and libraries was organised by the Victorian Multicultural Working Group. And this landmark conference, which took place in Melbourne, focused on how libraries should define their role in a country which was redefining itself in terms of multiculturalism. The group's main aim was to provide a fair and equitable library service to all Victorians, whatever their cultural language. And this group led a coordinated response from the Victorian library sector to establish multicultural policies and programs that proved influentially nationally and internationally. And through all their work, a particular model of multicultural library service was defined and inscribed in the Australian public libraries. That was sort of like our heyday in multiculturalism, the 1970s. This working group was really instrumental because they actually were responsible also for developing standards for multicultural public library service. And the standards were later used to form the basis of the International Federation of Library Association guidelines on library service to multicultural communities. However, in the early 2000s, the focus on multiculturalism in public policy diminished, unfortunately, and libraries, and indeed quite a number of cultural institutions, were affected by this. So the group that was established in the 70s ceased its activities in 2002 and was absorbed into the public libraries network as an informal and a special interest group. And it was the same year that ALIA withdrew its policy of multiculturalism and libraries, which had been adopted in 1984. If you want to find out a little bit more about the history, it is really fascinating. And I would like to acknowledge Kieran Hegarty's case study called Defining and Inscribing Multicultural Library Service in Australia, a case study of the working group of multicultural library service. It really does trace the history behind the group. But however, in saying all this, I must mention that in the 2000s, we did it did provide some really valuable learnings and has reinforced the importance of working collaboratively to ensure that multiculturalism remains in the forefront of libraries. There is an opportunity for more inclusion and knowledge sharing to make collaboration a reality, and providing more of an information exchange on matters relating to multicultural librarianship. It also provides professional leadership in this aspect of librarianship and seeks contacts, discussion and participation with other groups and individuals concerned with multicultural issues. Coming together with ALIA is actually the first step in ensuring that we do not make the same mistakes of the 2000s. And in this time, our learnings have deepened, our language and understandings have developed. We have some important and much needed work to do, not only to gain ground, but to move forward. Working together and across sectors is the way forward, and is giving our multicultural communities and colleagues a voice and bringing them to the table. So in the spirit of collaboration and consultation, we invite you to contribute your ideas of what is important in our questionnaire. So we'll have a link to our questionnaire in the chat. So if you do not mind filling that out, that would really help our group to establish what you would like to see. And so today we've achieved an important milestone of re-establishing the ALIA Multicultural Group across Australia. I would like to thank you all on behalf of the organisation and ALIA. Thanks very much.
With this word of that we are open for all your suggestions, for your ideas, for participation, for collaboration, because we're going to make this work and we're moving forward. So don't forget about that. Once again, I would like to thank you profoundly, ALIA, because it's taking the reign again and we're moving into the future. Once again, thank you to Professor Bianco for being here today and remind us the important thing. And I'm pretty sure that all my colleagues will be thinking, I just identified a gap. I'm going to do something about it. And so with great enthusiasm, with lots of energy, we will be seeing you soon. So thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon, a fantastic weekend, and work hard, because I'm going to do that. Goodbye then.
Bye-bye.